Hello and welcome to another episode of Geopolitical Cousins. It is your producer, Other Jacob. Today, Marko and Jacob Shapiro take a dive into the Ukraine war, which we haven't touched on in a while, and then really spend the rest of the episode taking a deep dive into the tariffs and what they mean for the U.S.'s relationship with everybody else now and in the future. That's all I got. Enjoy the episode. Go spend time with your loved ones and touch some grass. See you guys out there.
We should rename the podcast Poolside Podcast because I'm by the poolside in Monroe, Georgia, in the middle of nowhere. I magically have Wi-Fi. This is the first time I've ever been here that the Wi-Fi actually worked. So we're both off the reservation, Marko.
Yes, and I'm still recording this from interior British Columbia. So there we go.
All right, so we decided to get together here for a quick one, which for us is probably going to be like an hour, because our last two podcasts were our absolutely incredible trade value leadership column, basically. If you haven't listened to those episodes, you need to go listen to it. If you haven't sent us all the reasons you think we're idiots, we want your email. Please send it to us. The email address is at the end of the episode. But Marko, the last time we actually spent time on what was going on in the news, it was Iran-Israel shit. So we have lots of things to catch up on. It was actually an interesting... Yeah, go ahead.
We haven't talked about any of this, what's going on in the world, almost in a month, if not more.
Which is an interesting exercise to go back and be like, well, has anything actually important happened since the Israel-Iran war? Was the Israel-Iran war actually important? I actually struggled a little bit to find things. But, and tellingly enough, when you called me right beforehand to set our list of topics for the agenda, you said the Russia-Ukraine war. I totally forgot that the Russia-Ukraine war was something we should talk about. So it just goes to show you. But let's start there. It's been a pretty seismic shift from the White House. I mean, a couple weeks ago, it seems like Pete Hegseth was going to try and limit weapons to Ukraine, and he didn't tell anybody, or he surprised the White House. Donald Trump turned around and said he's actually going to dramatically increase weapon supplies to European allies. So they're going to be selling roughly $10 billion worth of weapons, including air defense, artillery, missiles, things like that to NATO allies, and weapons that are eventually going to go to Ukraine. He's also given Russia a 50-day ultimatum that if there isn't peace in 50 days, they're going to start talking about secondary tariffs, which, we're parsing Trumpian language here, Trumponology, but we think that means secondary sanctions on purchases of Russian oil from China and India and other countries. That's probably what that means, but who knows? I'll quote President Trump from Monday, quote, he said this about when he speaks to Putin. I always hang up and say, well, that was a nice phone call. And then missiles are launched into Kyiv or some other city. And after that happens 3 or 4 times, you say, talk doesn't mean anything, end quote. Donald, we're glad you got here after however many months of dealing with Vladimir Putin you finally realized the pattern. That's cool. Where do you want to take this at the offset? Because, we'll probably get to the end of 50 days. I don't think Putin's going to stop, or maybe you see something different. But what are you seeing, Marko?
I think we have to stop from the point that Jeffrey Epstein is a Russian spy.
Of course. How could I forget that?
No, I just figured if we're going to get more clicks, Jacob, the one thing that we didn't talk about at any point in our podcast is Jeffrey Epstein.
Well, I'm going to steal this from X. Isn't it incredible that the only impeached president in U.S. history who wasn't hanging out on Jeffrey Epstein's boat was Andrew Johnson? Isn't that an incredible just fact of reality?
Yeah, so let's talk Russia-Ukraine. That was a joke, by the way. I have nothing really smart to say about the Epstein thing, but maybe I will at some point. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out. I think the Russia-Ukraine thing is interesting because, first of all, it reveals how, I think, stupid the notion that Trump is pro-Russian really is. I've gotten inundated, Jacob, with questions from friends, family, clients, from everybody about, hey, what's this 180-degree turn in Russia? And I'm like, what's turn in Russia? The man is pro-Trump. He's not pro-Russia. He's not pro-China. He's not pro-Israel, by the way. He's not pro-anything. He's just pro-Trump. And so he shows up and he says, I want peace in Ukraine. This war is unsustainable. And objectively speaking, Donald Trump is correct in this. This conflict is unsustainable, and this notion that the West should continually support Ukrainian efforts to reclaim their territories is going to end Ukraine as we know it. The West will bleed Ukraine dry. This is an unsustainable conflict. It has to end. So Trump says, okay, well, I'm going to end it, and I'm going to look cool doing it. And so he slaps Zelensky around in the White House which wasn't completely incorrect, because part of the problem is that Zelensky has been given a blank check by previous administration and many Europeans. And so he needs to be put in line with this notion that, yes, you do need to negotiate with the Russians. And he's like, but they're murderers. Yeah, well, that's kind of like what war is, like, welcome. Hello. Yeah, thank you. So thanks for being with us. And so the media latches on to that. And of course, previous Russia hoax the stuff. And it's just like, oh my God, Donald Trump has gone fully Manchurian candidate here. Meanwhile, Donald Trump expects Putin to react to all of this, including to the fact that American officials are starting to take Russian interests seriously, whether it's, not having Ukraine in NATO, whether it's like, hey, we want to keep these territories. Oh, interesting. Okay, fine. Let's talk about it. This entire time, Trump expects Putin to be fair and objective and say, okay, cool, thanks. Like, let me reciprocate. But what I don't think that they understand in the White House, or really anywhere, media, journalists, analysts, nobody, is that Putin has a real problem. He promised Donbas, which is Donetsk and Luhansk together, 2 oblasts of Ukraine, make Donbas. The problem is that a third of Donetsk, a third of this territory, like 30% of it, Russians have not been able to conquer for 11 years. I mean, not like 3 years since 2022, but since 2014, 2015 conflict, there's this part of Donetsk that the Ukrainians are just defending valiantly and impressively. And so Putin has a problem. I genuinely believe that Putin feels like he got 90% of what he wanted from Ukraine. So I actually don't fall into the camp that he's just going to keep stringing it along until the Russian tricolor is waving across Elysee in Paris. Like, that shit's not going to happen. He's got 90% what he wants. He can't conquer Donetsk for 11 years, for God's sakes, people. He's not going to invade Estonia or Poland. If he invades Poland, quite frankly, Poland will reinvade and conquer Moscow.
Yeah. That's
my hot take. Yeah. So my point of all of this is, Putin has a problem, which is that Donald Trump got elected too early, quite frankly. He got elected too early. He got elected about 12, 18 months too early. And what I mean by that is that Putin, that last 10% of objectives that Putin needs is kind of important domestically in Russia, which is that how do you go back to all your nationalist military bloggers who are basically trying to say that they're out-Putining Putin? How are you going to go back to them and say, oh, hey, guys, by the way, Donald Trump is the president. Cool. We got all sorts of goodies out of America. They're recognizing our sphere of influence. They're letting us keep these territories. They're making sure that Kiev doesn't get into NATO. So we won, right? And they're going to say, but you promised us Novaya Russia. You promised us Donbas. Like, what's up with this, like, third of Donetsk we haven't conquered? And so that, I think, is the fulcrum. Sometimes these geopolitical events, they have like a fulcrum, the thing that needs to be resolved. And what needs to be resolved is that when you look at the map, the Russians haven't conquered part of Ukraine they promised their people. It's not about Kiev. It's not about West Ukraine. It's not about the rest of Europe. It's just that sliver. I mean, if you look at it on a map, it doesn't look that big. It's a third of Donetsk. Nobody cares about it. It's just empty space, but Putin does. And that's the problem. That's the challenge here. And of course, everybody in the US, most of the mainstream media is like now shocked that Trump has turned on Putin. I'm not, because I never assumed that he was pro-Putin to begin with. In other words, Donald Trump is very disappointed and he feels he's being strung along, as he said. I think that's his direct quote. And I can just imagine Donald Trump's eyes glazing over, Jacob, if I was in the White House explaining to him, well, Mr. President, like Putin wants to conquer Donetsk, which is part of Donbas, and I could just see him being like, I don't give a fuck. This is petty. What are you talking about? And that's where sometimes these domestic political issues get in the way of rational geopolitical negotiations.
It's so hard to talk about. I'm literally like looking into a pasture right now where my wife and my daughter and my niece are like driving through the fields with an electric car. Who says that the world sucks in 2025? There's a couple things that I would say to that. The first is I think you're right, and it's not even that Trump is pro-Trump. And I think Russia makes this mistake too. I've said this before, but I think it bears repeating because I don't think it's getting through to people. I don't think Trump is strategic. He doesn't think long-term. He is an instinctual being. He's a child. He wants what he wants when he wants it. And when he doesn't get it, he throws a tantrum. And now he, in his mind, is the leader of the free world and the most powerful country in the world. So you better do exactly what I say when he says it. So I'm sure that there were people, maybe up to Putin himself, that were like, aha, we've got the guy in the White House. We've got the dude who is going to like, we've cultivated this guy for decades via Jeffrey Epstein and everything else. No, like he literally wants what he wants when he wants it. And this is why I think Zelensky, like I think if you go back to that episode in the White House, I think Zelensky did the right thing. I think that he actually, by pushing back against Trump and throwing his hissy fit, like he was responding. He was able to give himself space to actually come closer to Trump and for Trump to feel like he had moved him along in some way. I think when you look back, like I know you've been anti-Zelensky on that tirade, and maybe he meant to do it, maybe he didn't do it. But that's one thing about Trump. He's not strategic, so he will change his mind like on a dime, and that's something for the Russians to learn too. The second thing I just want to say is that I think you're right that Putin has downgraded his desires to Donetsk, but he wanted the Russian tricolor in Kyiv. And his promise and all of his essays and talks about Ukraine, like he wants to sort of get there. And that's where I think it's not going to stop and where it's going to get to what you've talked about, like Ukraine as a garrison state. And then the last thing is just, this is also an example of Donald Trump's charisma, because Iran, Israel didn't affect him. Jeffrey Epstein doesn't seem to be affecting him. As, there's those people on social media burning "Make America Great Again" hats. Okay, like it's like LeBron. I've made this metaphor before. Like as soon as LeBron comes back, they're gonna like buy the jerseys again. So he's just gonna get the money twice. But now he's talking about sending tens of billions of dollars worth of weapons to Ukraine. Now he's selling them, so you can at least make that argument. But I assume that the MAGA folks and the America First folks, like, what does it take for you to light your hair on fire? Because this is not Donald Trump like, oh, I'm making America great again. He's like, I'm arming Ukraine and I'm bombing Iran and I'm doing all this stuff. Like, this is not like the isolationist president at all people were expecting. So,
well, I think probably nothing. But let me go back to the point you said about Russians. Russians have a very long history of being completely and utterly like naive when it comes to American politics. They just cannot assess American politics correctly. This goes back to, Kennedy. Kennedy comes in, everyone's like, oh, he's a young womanizer. We can just like sneak stuff by him. And then we almost go to World War III. And Kennedy's like, test me, come at me. And of course, that ends up being, a Soviet back down from Cuba. So this Russian mentality of thinking everything is a conspiracy theory, this Russian mentality of thinking that there's a sort of a paranoid, delusional conspiracy behind everything is really making them very poor analysts of American domestic politics. And I think that, they actually bought the liberal mainstream propaganda in the US that Trump is pro-Russian, that he's enamored with Putin and that he can just string him along. The problem is that Donald Trump has made a promise, and that promise is we will have a ceasefire, not necessarily a peace, but a ceasefire in Ukraine. And Putin is now embarrassing him domestically. That's the fundamental, and that's the worst place to be in, to embarrass Trump. And I think that's a problem. The other thing is that the deal that's now coming out, which is actually quite smart. I mean, a couple of months ago, I made fun of that rare earth mineral deal as the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. I mean, it's completely vacuous. But this drone deal that actually is going to happen is interesting. I mean, Ukraine and Russia are probably the world's greatest innovators on drone warfare right now, because they have to be. It's life or death situation. The Ukrainians have developed some absolutely insane drone technology, both aerial and naval. And so the US is now, getting all this IP out of Ukraine. That's actually a really good deal for the US. It's a really smart deal. And Trump is now like really sinking strategic teeth into Ukraine in a way that should worry Russians, because I think that they're going to have to make a deal. And this 50-day deadline is no joke. I actually think it's serious. I do think they will impose secondary sanctions on Turkish, Indian, Chinese, whoever's companies. And so what Russia has to really ask itself is, what are our strategic objectives in Ukraine? What are they? If it's to delineate the sphere of influence to the maximum potential that we can, get the most we can in terms of delineation, then like this seems to be it, guys. And the second is to ensure that Ukraine remains sort of a non-aligned. It will clearly stay aligned with the West, but at least it's not going to be part of NATO. Like, you've accomplished those two things. And I think they're going to have to realize over the next month and a half, 2 months, that Trump is not kidding, that he is extremely angry, that they are embarrassing him domestically, and that sliver of Donetsk can be conquered 5-10 years from now, maybe in some sort of a future exchange, because clearly this is going to be a frozen conflict, but they cannot conquer it right now. They're going to have to give that up. So that's my low conviction view. I think this actually ends with Trump victory 2-3 months from now, where he basically does manage to bring everyone to the table, and there's at least a ceasefire, because it's just simply unsustainable for Russia at this point, and it's going to cost them a lot. Like, yes, they have more troops. Yes, they can bleed Ukraine that way. But those secondary sanctions, man, those are really serious sanctions. And if you remember 2011, 2012, that's how Iran was brought to heel. The US actually imposed those. China played along, and Iran ended up negotiating JCPOA. So I do think that Russia is going to have to abandon its goal of like conquering this third of Donetsk that nobody can even find on a map.
Let's say, for the sake of argument, that Putin doesn't listen and the secondary sanctions go on. Don't you think that means higher oil prices?
I mean, marginally speaking, obviously, ceteris paribus, all other things being equal world. Yeah, there's demand and supply and slowing economy. There's a lot of other forces, but absolutely. It's about 3 million barrels that could be impacted. Right now, it seems that the sanctions would be 100% of the price, which suggests, given there's already a discount to Russian crude, that some buyers may still buy it. So and just pay the fee. But I do think that on the margin, it would mean slightly higher oil prices. Yeah.
Yeah. Which might be the only thing that Russia could count on, that, okay, he doesn't want the higher oil prices, so maybe he won't follow through on it.
But see, that's again dangerous. That they're making, I mean, turn the TikTok camera on, okay?
Turn it on. Where's Kyle? Oh, we don't have a Kyle.
Where's Kyle? Yeah, we don't have a Kyle, unfortunately. We're a small operation, but here's what I would say. I want to speak directly to whoever is at the Kremlin, engaged in analyzing American politics. You're fired. And that's it. You're fired. Bye.
I love
Bye.
that. It's The Apprentice, but Marco's taken over while President Trump is busy doing other things.
I just think Russians have no idea what's going on in the U.S. And if they think that Donald Trump gives a shit about oil prices going from 65 to 75, somehow America will survive. By the way, look at the chart of gasoline as percent of the consumer basket. It's absolutely collapsed since the 90s. Americans just don't spend that much on gasoline as percent of their total household expenditure. So, and it's a transitory blip in inflation, and it's like 3 million barrels. I can just see Trump making a deal with Iran, honestly, to compensate for a bit. So Saudis.
Well, and the Saudis are already pumping. The Saudis have been pumping for months. Probably he's been working through them already. Go back to pre-COVID. The news of the decade would have been the Saudi-Russian oil price war that got put on hold because of COVID. So the Saudis are happy to kick him in the teeth while they're there. So.
And by the way, I know you want to talk about the CPI, which we can get to right now because I think it's a great topic. What better way to justify why inflation is going up than to blame Vladimir Putin? So the Russians, if they think that an increase in oil price is going to hurt President Trump, I don't think so at all. He's going to blame it on them. He's going to, say look, we're going to punish them. Oil prices will be up for 6 to 12 months. We can take it as an economy and we'll move on. And again, it's not going to be $100. This isn't like Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz. Yeah. This is going to be more like going from $65 to like 75, 80. The world's not going to end because of that, but Russian purse is going to drain because of that. And so I do think that Putin has a really, really interesting open window of opportunity here to make a deal that's set in stone, that's sphere of influence. And if he loses it, then he doesn't know American politics. And I don't think he does. I think that he's misunderstanding it.
Unless he has a rabbit in his hat that takes it to 100 a barrel. I think you're exactly right. I don't think he can get it to 100 a barrel. If he can get oil to sustain at 100 plus a barrel, I think he might actually have a leg to stand on. I think you're firing the Russian American political analysts for the wrong reason. My experience of them the last time I was in Moscow, was it 2018, 2019? It was before the pandemic. And I remember this Russian-American analyst came up to me and he was quizzing me about some congressional race in Alabama that I'd never heard of. And he knew everything about it. And he wanted to know what I thought about the race and how it was going to affect the balance of U.S. politics in the House. And I was like, my guy, we're not thinking about, no self-respecting analyst gives a shit about this in the United States. It's very impressive that you're in backwoods Alabama politics, but this does not matter. So you need to fire them because they know too much. They are so far down in the weeds, with all these very, very specific things that they're missing the forest for the trees. I also,
Yeah.
before we, oh yeah, go ahead, good. Yeah.
Yeah, no, the forest is like Donald Trump is the president. Don't piss him off. Like,
Yeah.
it's simple. It's simple. Why would you do that? And no, his MAGA supporters are not going to turn on him for this. It's like the noise on Ukraine is so much less than even on Iran. And definitely this Jeffrey Epstein thing is just like a blob that's taking over the MAGA civil war, which I find kind of hilarious, but whatever, let them, let them obsess about that. Who cares? The point is, there is just, Americans are not pro-Russian. I mean, like, let's just start there. Like, yes, many Americans who voted for Trump were not happy with the blank check given to Ukraine. Yes, agreed. But don't extrapolate that to some sort of like a nostalgia for like Slavophile, like Dostoevsky love. No,
Well,
guys, like,
to your point,
this
like
is America.
I'm in MAGA country right now, and I remember when the war broke out, like in rural Georgia out here, everybody had Ukrainian flags. They're not out anymore, but I'm sure they're still in the garage. Like I'm so all these people could take them out.
Yeah, they can take them out. Like, and that's why I think I think a lot of these guys are either like nerds that you ran into, or they just are like so far down the far right Twitter rabbit hole that they actually believe Americans like love Russia. They all watch that Tucker Carlson episode where he's in Moscow on repeat, and they actually think that matters. It doesn't, and it's a very dangerous moment for Russia because I do. So you're right. Like my baseline here is that Putin is not an idiot, and he realizes he needs to act on this window of opportunity with Trump.
Yeah, but he's high on his own supply. Like going back to like the trade value column, like if we were gonna let's like bring in a Wire reference to really bring this like full Bill Simmons, like it's like as if Stringer Bell started shooting up his own product. Like that's where Putin is. And since 2020, he's been high on his own supply, thinking he was, everything from the pandemic to the long table to the invasion of Kyiv and a blitzkrieg that didn't work because he didn't even tell his generals. Like he's high on his own supply. It's not going to work.
So how do we conclude this? Let's conclude it this way. So if you're watching the news and you don't know what the hell is going on, it's that simple. Putin just wants to conquer one last bit of territory that he really needs before he can maybe put this war on pause for 5 to 10 years, whatever.
Yeah.
The rational thing to do is just to give up and say, okay, fine. You know what? Let's just take it while we can. Take a deal from the US. But as you said, Putin has made a lot of bad decisions over the past 5 years.
Yeah.
And so this is a risk. It's a risk of direct US-Russia confrontation, not military. I'm not talking nuclear war, but actual return, even under Trump, of a very aggressive US that counters Russia. So I do think that's a risk over the next 6 months that we need to watch.
Yeah. Before we pivot to CPI, I want to say something that is separate but sort of related to this, which is, I don't know if you saw the Pentagon's new changes to the doctrine policy, I don't know the correct word, about the use of small drones in the field. So rather than treating them as, basically as aircraft, they're treating them as consumables. So something like a hand grenade or other types of ammunition. Mm-hmm. And they're talking about training people and authorizing people on the battlefield to be able to call these in to use them themselves in any kind of conflict. So I think you're right about Russia, Ukraine, like being this laboratory for drone usage. We've seen this with the Houthis. We've seen this with US and Iran. And now you've got the US military like finally taking notice and saying, okay, we're going to be a drone superpower too. There's also tons of money going at anti-drone defense. Like I think this is a whole area that's like changing very, very quickly. And it starts with this Russia-Ukraine war. I don't know where it ends, but like it definitely starts.
And I think
there.
It starts, look, I referenced some YouTube videos that our viewers can watch on Ukrainian and Russian drone technology and how it's advanced. And I think it also starts with the US recognizing that there's a lot of IP floating in Ukraine right now, a lot of IP. This is the battleground where drones are being deployed in an incredibly fast evolution. So I think that's a very smart move by the Trump administration to say, okay, cool. How can you pay us for these weapons? Well, we don't need Ukraine to like sell off its like grandma's silver to pay for the weapons. But you know what you can do? Give those the drone IP. And that was a good move, like astute move by somebody at the Pentagon.
coming to you all soon. Tickers on the stock exchange that reference Lord of the Rings that are drones or drone defense companies, all sourced from the battlefield in Ukraine
100%.
and Russia.
100%.
Although they've taken most of the good ones. We're going to have to really start digging in the bag of Lord of the Rings if we're going to start finding other names for these things.
Bombadil is out there, guys.
Tom Bombadil. Oh, there we go. I need to trademark that one. Okay. Let's talk CPI for a bit. This will probably be a shorter conversation, but core CPI was roughly in line, 2.9%, year on year. Headline CPI was 2.6%, but there was a big jump in core goods. Core services was hot. Medical care services was hot. I would describe it as a moderately warm CPI print. And I know you're probably going to take the other side of this, but I just want to say that I think people thought that after Liberation Day, there was going to be an immediate increase in prices due to tariffs. And that was never the way it was going to work because there was stuff getting shipped via other countries that wasn't China. Like look at the imports from places like Vietnam or Indonesia or Thailand from China and transshipments and things like that. Like those things weren't closed off. Lots of companies had inventory on hand that they were going to burn through and they had been stocking up in preparation for something like Liberation Day. It just takes time. It's sort of like a snake eating something too big for itself, and it takes time for it to digest. But I have been thinking since Liberation Day that if Trump stuck to the guns, and he looks like he's trying to stick to the guns, we'll get to tariffs and trade maybe as part of this, because I think we need to talk about Trump and the 50% tariffs on Brazil and the ongoing free trade agreements with India. Does he or does he not have a deal with Vietnam? What's going on with China? We're going to send them, chips from NVIDIA, but we're also going to crack down on the other things. I think all that is part of the conversation. But I was never one of these people that was expecting inflation to go to the moon. But I do maybe think that what we could say is when is maybe we're at the lowest point of inflation for the last 12 months. I think we're really heading towards also this conflict with Jerome Powell and the Fed, and are you going to raise rates or not? If inflation is starting to slowly tick up from here because the tariffs are starting to have some sort of impact. So, it's not the be all end all. Maybe we get a couple more CPIs and they're not working that way. But this is the first CPI where I was okay, a little tiny signs that maybe we're going to start seeing the long-term impact of these things and prices moving up. And I think that'll be challenging for President Trump if it keeps up, because you can do the sleight of hand with Iran and Israel and Russia and Ukraine. It all works for those things. But when the price of eggs starts going up, when the price of all these other things starts going up, we've seen what people do. So tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me why you think that's not the right thing.
No, I think politically you are right. I think from a political perspective, inflation is clearly the number one concern of Americans, and the intensity of that concern has actually increased over the past 6 months, even though CPI has come down from almost double-digit levels. And that's because, prices are, CPI is slowing down, but prices are still rising.
Okay.
So there's no disinflation, and that's just where we're going to be for the next 10 years. That the price increase we got is where we're going to stay. So people are going to stay mad for a very long time. So from a political perspective, you're 100% right. And everything I'm about to say doesn't matter from a political human perspective. And a lot of the people who listen to this, listen to our podcast for that perspective. So you're correct. From a market perspective, however, I do think it's going to be difficult for CPI to rise a lot because shelter is 40% of core CPI, and it's tanking. It's tanking.
Yes.
And the second issue I would say is that widgets, things like goods, right? This is the stuff that we get from China and abroad. They're going to go up in prices. But for all of you who are listening to this, there's a very important concept, which is that when a price of an item goes up, it's actually in a way disinflationary, unless it's supported by wage growth or some sort of demand stimulus. So, and that's where I would say that it's absolutely criminally insane that Jay Powell thought inflation was transitory in 2021. This is something that he should be fired for. It's insanity. The Central Bank of Mexico is raising rates, bro. And you are sitting there and you're saying it's transitory because the argument is well, these supply chain issues are going to resolve themselves. No, it doesn't matter because there was so much fiscal stimulus in 21 and 22 that it supported the increase in prices. So the price increase ended up being sustainable and just kept feeding on itself. The difference this time, Jacob, is that we don't have fiscal stimulus. The one big beautiful bill is not stimulative. It's very, very small increase in fiscal thrust for 2026, and that actually becomes negative. So there, and I mean, this is not a disputable point that we're so far away from the fiscal stimulus of the 2020s or 2021. We don't have cash handouts to people where they can afford to buy ever increasing goods. And so because of that, from a market perspective, the CPI increase that we're getting right now is actually quite transitory. And it's quite funny that Jay Powell this time around is not using the word transitory, but he should be. Everything that's going to come from the tariffs will be transitory because it's not being supported by any fiscal stimulus. And because of that, I actually don't think that this increase will have market implications. I hear you on the politics, though. On the politics, absolutely. And I would say the two actually feed on each other in that it's very, very painful and difficult for him to impose extreme tariffs. And that's why I think you will get deals. So I think we're going to end up with a 10 to 15% increase in goods prices across the board. That's like the level we should be expecting. And that's a one-off hit. A lot of that corporates who manufacture, the retailers will have to take on in their profit margins. Some of it will be passed on to the consumer. And I think it will be transitory this time around. So this time around, this increase is transitory because there's just no fiscal backstop.
Yeah, we've come so far that adding 3 to 4 trillion to the deficit is not considered stimulative, or that you can make that argument and that it's not. And this is, one place where you and I differ. Like, to me, the one big beautiful bill, yes, it's not direct cash handouts, but it's still adding 4 trillion to the deficit, and the cuts don't really kick in until 2028. I think this is a good time also to bring up the MP material deals, which is something I think is super interesting. So the Pentagon has basically become the largest shareholder in MP materials. They refine rare earths and other things like that. The Pentagon is also basically agreeing to purchase commitments and a floor price, a 10-year agreement establishing a price floor commitment of, for instance, $110 per kilogram of one of the things that MP material sells. This is sort of similar to what the United States did with the semiconductor industry in the 1950s and 60s when they were going up against the Soviets and they wanted to put chips on missiles to create precision-guided munitions. Like, the semiconductor companies exist because the U.S. government came in and said, we will buy all of these chips and we will buy them at a certain price and you will survive. And then we get chips in our phones and our laptops and this thing that we're recording on right now. But if that's true, like if this is what the Pentagon is doing and they're, gearing up this capacity, you're going to pay more for these things if you're one of these other companies in general that's been importing this stuff cheaply from China. And this is one of the asymmetric levers that China has been threatening, that if you go after us on all these different things when it comes to trade, like, yes, you're going to win, you're bigger than us, but we will make it painful for you. And we can make it especially painful for U.S. companies that need to source these things. So I think it's actually the U.S. government signaling, hey, like, this stuff is going to cost more because it's going to be made and refined in the United States. And so, and I think there's also like an interesting thing happening here where you can hear the ambivalence in my voice and in my take, because you have this sort of thing on the one hand, and then on the other, it's, oh, NVIDIA, you can send the chips to China.
Yeah.
Which, like,
awesome.
these things don't make sense. Like, are you Trump the globalist who just wants to make a deal with China and trade more? Or are you Trump the, we are going to get all of our rare earths sourced from the United States and pay more for it, but we're going to be secure as a result of it? Like, these are not, this is the right hand and the left hand not knowing what they're doing to me. But no, take it though. Maybe you think it can make sense.
I can defend it. I can defend it because, look, there are certain technologies that, like, so first of all, what is the foundation of geopolitical power? And it's material wealth.
Material wealth. I thought it was rivers. Hashtag Peter's eye.
Absolutely not. Okay. So it's the source, like, the foundation of wealth is material power, and obviously, access to technology, but you're not going to access technology unless you have money. And so money is very important. Now, I love the scene in A House of Cards that you have before quoted myself. I mean, it's in my book. You may have all the money, Raymond, but I have all the men with guns, which Kevin Spacey delivers in his extremely, like, great act. Like, I agree with that, Jacob, but men with guns is expensive. And so the reason I say this is because I do think it's a simplistic view that one can just stop trading with China. No, you just have to be smart about it. So is NVIDIA going to give China the most cutting edge chips that it has its in arsenal? I actually don't know, but I'm assuming the deal with the US government is that no, we'll give them some generation older chip. Same with Airbus or Boeing. Should Boeing stop selling aircraft to China? That's the most idiotic thing I've ever heard. First of all, Boeing airplanes suck. So, like, there you go, China. Like, gorge yourself on planes that are going to fall out of the sky. But the more serious point is that this is 1980s and 1990s technology that you're selling to China. They buy an airplane that allows Boeing to then spend R&D on the latest technology. Like, that's the whole point of the video. You cannot cut off the video, and you cannot cut off. This isn't pro-globalist. This isn't like, oh, Marko works for finance bros. He just wants NVIDIA stock to go up. No, this is like legitimately obvious point. China's second largest economy in the world. It's a huge consumer market. You are going to hurt NVIDIA's efforts to use its revenue to funnel into R&D to develop new chips unless you let them trade with China. So that's the first point I would say. The second point is then, okay, then you can identify certain things in your supply chain that are critical to you. And you just invest a lot into those to make sure that you can actually have that domestically. So I think you can both be a globalist and put 50% tariffs on steel. Like, I think you can do both things. If you decide steel is really important in the 21st century, if you decide that you need rare earth mineral refining in your country, fine. Like, whatever it is that you decide, you can have like a backstop domestically while still trading with essentially your rival. And here's why you have to trade with China. The reason you have to trade with China, the reason that you have to let NVIDIA trade with China is because I guarantee you that Tokyo Electron and Samsung and, all these other allies of the US are going to continue to trade with China. And so you're going to fall behind. You're going to cede marketplace to somebody else. And then 10, 15 years from now, you're wondering why the Dutch or the South Korean or the Japanese are at the forefront of AI. Because you decided not to make the money off of the Chinese with second or third generation goods that you were selling them. So I think it requires nuance.
It does, and I take your point, but it can be done over a period of years if the federal government is going to support the strategic sectors that you're talking about, and that's not what's happening. Like, if you want to do what you're talking about, then you need, sorry, MAGA folks, you need Biden's industrial policy blueprint. You need to go in and actually support and train and set a floor, not just for these materials, but for all the things that are strategic, what is not happening. They're giving, the size of Italy's military budget to ICE, and they're cutting Medicaid, and they're doing things like that. They're not out there saying in 5 years we want to be making X, Y, and Z things in the United States, and here's how we're going to retrain the workforce, and here's how we're going to bring the factories back, and here's the countries that we're going to nearshore some of the other components that we need. Like, that's not what they're doing. They're doing some of these one-offs. So I think they're going to reach a point where you're going to get all these inputs where the price is going to go up significantly because the things that you're talking about haven't kicked in yet. And China's just going to take advantage of those things. And I think the other thing in what you said is that the EU, Japan, South Korea, they were being more reticent with China until the last 3 or 4 months. Now Japan is going like, screw y'all. We're going all in on China now. Now South Korea is saying, fuck this. Like, you want to treat us like this? We will punch back a little bit. We are not Canada, my friend. Like, you want to see what this looks like? Go cook.
No. So let me put what you're saying, and I think, like, kind of wrap it. I think that you're correct, and that's where the strategy for like creating critical infrastructure should be not just American, and that's where I think the Trump administration's treatment of allies really will hurt the U.S. over the 10 to 20-year horizon. Like, why not set up some of this rare earth refining? It's very difficult to build a refiner for rare earths because basically what's left after you refine rare earths is toxic, extremely toxic material and toxic waste. So how are you going to set this up in the United States of America? Like, it may make sense to move it out of China to an ally. And your point is like, well, you've kind of, you're not really thinking about that seriously. You want to put everything into the US. You want US to produce steel, and you treat Canadian steel as somehow a national security threat. That will significantly increase cost domestically. Whereas just spreading it around, quote unquote, the West writ large would have been a cheaper strategy. And I think a strategy that would have ensured that those allies, see America as a reliable partner. So I think your criticism of the Trump administration is very valid, and I think that they are going to have to explain themselves for that attitude that they had both in the first term and this term, which is what it's this thing that Jared Kushner said in the first term. It's what have you done for me lately, world? Use that term. And similarly, it's this whole idea that the rest of the world owes something to the U.S. and so the U.S. is going to cash in on it. I think that was a mistake, and you've identified why. Because if you have to onshore all of this stuff domestically, it is going to increase prices, and it also ensures that those allies are no longer reliable partners. So no counter for me on that one.
And, Jared's not around anymore. We can't even go to Jared now because Jared's busy making money off the first term because he realizes that the second term is kind of crazy. But this, I think it's a perfect bookend to what we were talking about earlier, because I think that Trump's instinctual nature, his non-strategic point of view, helps him with Russia-Ukraine because he has a real instinct for where is power, where is weakness, for getting what I want, for pushing my finger on the place that is going to get me what I want.
Iran, Israel too. Sorry to interrupt you, Jacob, but why are we not talking about Iran and Israel? Because it was actually handled extremely well by Donald Trump. And here we are, like a month later, nobody cares. Where's the instability in the Middle East? Where is it? I'm looking
up. Well, it's in southern Syria because Israel is now bombing southern Syria because the Druze are in the Syrian sectarian issues. And that's all we're going to talk about because it's not that important. But it's there. It's not like Israel's acting like a great power now, by the way, in the Middle East. I said this on Twitter. Kurds, if you're listening, watch what's happening with the Druze in southern Syria. If you have any hope for an independent state in your lifetime, you should be taking notes. But that's the only thing I'm going to say about the Middle East. But I said something nice about President Trump. Now I'm going to say something not so nice about President Trump, because all the things that made him good at Russia, Ukraine, and make him good at this Iran-Israel thing are making him extremely incompetent when it comes to trade. This idea that you're going to throw 50% tariffs on Brazil because you're mad that Bolsonaro's getting it kicked in the teeth.
That's the best one.
It's asinine.
Let's
and you've turned Brazil against you. Go look at Brazilian social media. They're furious. It's a center-right leaning country, and you're giving Lula support. What are you doing? Sorry, go ahead.
Listen, no, don't apologize. I just want to build on this. This is Brazil has a trade deficit with the United States of America. Let me break this down really simple for people in the administration who don't know math. Peter Navarro. So basically, you have a country that imports a lot of stuff from America and doesn't send anything back. That's Brazil. It's one of the few countries on the planet that actually finds American goods useful. And it doesn't send anything back to America. Americans don't buy anything from Brazil. It's there's nothing to buy. It's perfectly fine. It's the one country that actually has a negative trade balance with the United States of America, where the U.S. is winning, according to President Trump's heuristics, which obviously I don't agree with, because trade balance is not the be-all, end-all in the world. My point is, this is fascinating. Brazil, you cannot tariff Brazil at 50%. You cannot, because first of all, whatever Brazil buys from America, it can buy from someone else. Let's just be very clear. There's absolutely nothing critical the United States of America sends to Brazil. Nothing. It can all be replaced by other countries, Europe, China, whatever. And on top of that, it's a big country on a continent where U.S. power is kind of relevant. It's the Western Hemisphere. And as you say, Jacob, you're pushing it into the arms of China for no real good strategic reason. And I agree with you. President Trump is like a hedge fund manager. In finance, we've got hedge fund managers, you have sovereign wealth funds and pension funds on the other side in terms of time horizons. Hedge fund has a time horizon from 0 to 3 months, maybe. An institutional investor is going to have a time horizon of 5 to 10 years. President Trump is treating his job as if he's a hedge fund manager. And in many ways, that's a good thing. As you pointed out, when it comes to Israel, Iran, he handled it, I think, very well. He understands game theory and negotiations really, really well. What he doesn't, I think, care about is how the consequences of those negotiations and those mini game theoretical moments where he crushes everybody really, really well because he negotiates better than everyone, because his counterparts have never freaking bought a car at a used car lot, whereas he He's been dealing with contractors all his life. He's actually lived in the real world. 9 out of 10 American policymakers have basically gone from an Ivy League college to a job in the State Department. And so they have no idea how the real world works. And it's fine. Like, that's his specialty. The problem is that those negotiating moments, yeah, they ignore the long term. And Brazil is a great example, but you can really make many others. Canada is also a good example.
Yeah, well, I want to make a few others. So, I mean, let's talk about a few. Like, I mean, Mexico is the one that is at the top of my mind. We're talking about tariffs again on Mexico and some demerits maybe for Sheinbaum if those things get through. Mexico's erasing the whole. And what you really need to do with Mexico, and I think Mexico would be open to this based on what I've read and learned over the past 8 to 10 months, is they've got a cartel problem and a security problem. So, okay, light them up. Like, go in there and make Mexico secure and like make Mexico a manufacturing center that is completely dependent on the United States and make that like a cheap labor workforce that's going for that. That's what you want. And there's something that you can do hand in hand there, and it will affect all these other things. There's India. They just wrapped up their 5th round of talks. They're trying to get some kind of interim deal or some deal in before August. You know what the sticking point is? The United States is insisting that we sell milk or dairy products into India and other farm goods. And it's like, everybody, all the farmers who listen to this, who have seen me at events, especially those at dairy events, I love y'all. And I'm rooting for y'all. But like this idea that we're going to use India so that we can sell dairy products into the Indian market. India is what gave the British Empire a second lease on life. If you can get a real free trade agreement with India and all these other different concessions from them on trade, you're going to hold it up because you want to sell them dairy products? Like, that's not going to help you. Like, India's going to surge dairy production, and in 10 years, they're not going to buy from the United States anymore, and the deal's going to be done, and you're just going to piss the Indians off, just like you did with the India-Pakistan stuff. One place in which his game theory stuff was not so wrong. Think about Vietnam. Thought they had a deal. It's a different deal than they negotiated. Now they're like, well, we can't even trust this guy because we thought we had a deal, so maybe we should look to China. Maybe we should look to some of these others. And that's before we get into Japan and South Korea and others. So it's this really short-term thinking, and he's pushing away all these allies that otherwise would want to be part of this system. And I think in 3, 5, 7 years, like the metaphor I've used is radiation sickness. Like, I think you will get a time horizon where things look like the patient has improved. That's what happens when you're exposed to a lethal dose of radiation, but the cellular structure has been so damaged that you can't like replicate yourself again, and then you die a terrible, horrible death. I don't think we're going to die a terrible, horrible death, but like, you're setting up the same pattern here where, okay, you did the shock, now things are going to look okay for a minute, and then, but inside the cellular structure, the patient is damaged. And Japan and South Korea, and even Canada, who just sent their first LNG shipment to South Korea, mazel tov to the Canadians, like, they're all like turning on you while saying nice things to your face, and you're just running around declaring victory and going to Jared. Rant over.
No, I think I really like that analogy because, one counter to your rant is Europe, right? It looks like Europe has found a way to deal with Trump. And, you're like Friedrich Merz came out, gave an interview recently, I think in the UK, where he basically said, like, look, President Trump was right. We were free riding. And, I have no problem with J.D. Vance's speech at Munich conference as an example. I mean, look it up if you don't know what I'm referring to for our listeners. But, but it underpins exactly how you defined it. It may just be that all these countries have figured out how to deal with Trump. Send him basically love letters through text message, as Mark Rutte did, the NATO Secretary General. Like, so effectively just go on TV and say, President Trump is awesome, he's right. But then work on divesting yourself from your security, trade, and economic links with America, which is obviously not good for the U.S. So I really like the radiation sickness analogy. And I think that a lot of people listening to this would say we're being unfair to President Trump because Europeans have fallen in line. I would raise the question, but are they falling in line by increasing their defense spending, or are they simply becoming geopolitically mature and exiting the geopolitical adolescence that actually served American interests for the past 70 years? And so they've just learned how to massage this rhetorically. Like, oh, President Trump, you're awesome. You're our daddy. Meanwhile, hey guys, let's build up our own capacity because Americans are unreliable. So yeah, I think you're right.
Well,
I think that's the
about
long
Europe.
term.
Like, I've been reading this quote from Emmanuel Macron, who is fairly down on our trade value leader list, but because he's a lame duck, because he can't run again. And I know that like he's got lots of problems as a politician, but he's still one of the smarter ones out there in terms of diagnosing geopolitics. He said this in a speech last week when he was celebrating Bastille Day. quote, "To be free in this world, you must be feared. To be feared, you have to be powerful. The whole nation must be stronger," end quote. You could put that in a 1930s leader and you wouldn't know that it was Emmanuel Macron speaking in 2025. So sure, that's why Mark Rutte is saying, great, I got the $10 billion worth of weapons from the United States for NATO and Ukraine and everything else. I sent in my last letter, everything's fine. Meanwhile, France is like, like we were gonna increase spending and build French products out to, 2030. Now we're gonna do it in 2 years. And now here's 10 billion euros more. And by the way, Boeing, we've got Airbus over here. We could sell that shit to China too. We're gonna have a new relationship with China as well. So like yeah, Europe is right there. Like he's created a pole, like both. It's funny, like Russia and the United States for generations have been fighting over Europe, basically. And now like Russia by invading Ukraine and Trump by prosecuting a trade war have created the strong Europe that both sides didn't want. They both wanted them like in between. It's just like totally self-defeating. Last word to you, Marco, and then we got to get out of here.
I know. I think I've compared Donald Trump to cod liver oil in the past. So cod liver oil is what was fed to children all across the world. I grew up in basically the third world, so we used to have this even in the 70s and 80s. So basically, you swallow it. It's extremely stinky, and it tastes terrible. So Donald Trump, if you're a foreign country, he is stinky and he tastes terrible. But the truth is, he's very good for you. Like the truth is that Donald Trump is really good for the rest of the world. Because he basically takes away this American benevolence to allies and it forces everybody to basically take stock of their own capabilities and their own failures and fix them and start fixing them. And so there's two ways to look at this, Jacob. You've taken the approach that this is not good for America. Like he's cod liver oil for the rest of the world, but not for the US. This is bad. I see that and I agree with it. Like from a purely kind of political science, international relations perspective, yes, you're correct. America's effectively kind of losing some of these alliance relationships. Allies are just being sycophants and saying nice things to President Trump or sending him sexts, as Rutte did, but they're really like moving on. On the other hand, I will just say one thing. Maybe this all doesn't end in a radiation sickness death. Maybe what it produces is a more balanced world, where like, is it really a risk to the United States of America that Canada solves some of its idiotic domestic economic issues that Mark Carney's trying to do? Like, God bless him, first time in 250 years, provinces can trade with one another. Is it really a problem that Europe can stand on its own 2 feet? Are Canada and Europe truly ever going to be enemies of the United States relative to Russia or China or some other country? And so in a way, maybe there is a more hopeful vision where the world just becomes a little bit more balanced and the US retrenches by building up some of these countries. And yes, it's not directly positive for the US, you are correct, but maybe a vassal relationship was not really in anybody's interest to begin with. So I'm just going to leave it there. I don't have an answer because instinctively I agree with you, but maybe you and I are looking at this from too much of a game of risk perspective, from a Machiavellian, purely realist political science view, and not from a different view, which is that, hey, maybe this will lead to a more balanced world where, yeah, Europe may have the capacity to say no to America, but maybe that's not such a bad thing, at the end of the day.
I think it's certainly not a bad thing for markets and investing. That's why I'm so bullish, like in general, on the next decade or two. I think there's a monster waiting at the end of this period, just like in the 1890s, there was a monster called World War I waiting at the end of it. So I worry about sort of that. But exactly what you just said is why you should be like skeptical and risk aware if you're into geopolitics. And if you're in investing, you should be like, the party is just getting started. Like,
no, Jacob, I love that. You're completely right. And I kind of feel the same way. That's why, like, I am not bearish right now on markets at all. Not this year, not like, I don't think the world is ending, but you're right. You're right. A multipolar world is not a bad place to be. We can be in it for 20, 50, 100 years. But when it ends,
usually doesn't end well.
Boy. Yeah.
So, all right. On that note, good to see you, cousin. I'll see you next week.
Same. Thank you.